This is my last installment of that series, Beatles fantasy albums that never were, hadn't they split up. We started in 1969 when they, also in the real timeline, were still a group, haven't yet split up. Then we went through the complete 70s. In the second half of the 70s, also in my scenario, they would, let's say, take some time off from each other and be split, but not in that mean-spirited way of the early 70s, but like, friends who just want to experience stuff on their own and do their own individual albums, but then come back together. The last thing we had was in late 1980, Double Fantasy, solo album by John Lennon. And fortunately in this scenario, like I said in the previous video, John Lennon doesn't get killed in December. So as he also had planned in the real timeline, in January 81 he flies to England for the first time in almost 10 years. Since he left to New York, he never came back to Britain. But now he comes back to Britain to meet up with the other Beatles and discuss the Long and Winding Road project, which was also in the real timeline planned for early 81 that they would discuss that. This is the project that would in the 90s eventually be released as the anthology, the Beatles anthology. In my scenario it will be called The Long and Winding Road. And they will do this, they will do this documentary on their career, and this will come out in late 81. And it will have a single of new material. I think it's the third or fourth Beatles Christmas single in this scenario. It sounds like I'm the biggest fan of Christmas. I'm not, but somehow they had so many Christmas themed songs in the 70s, and I think it's a good opportunity to put these out as singles. And in this scenario it's a double A-side single, Free as a Bird by John, and that's the Christmas theme thing, Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul. So this would be the single to accompany the Long and Winding Road documentary project. And there will be a worldwide documentary on hundreds of countries and hundreds TV stations. They will broadcast in late 81, I don't know, 6 or 8 or 10 hour multi-part documentary on about the career of the Beatles, and will also be accompanied, like in the real timeline, with double albums, maybe not just 3, but in my scenario, since the career of the Beatles lasted longer and included more albums, maybe 4 or 5 double albums with unreleased material, live stuff, outtakes, studio chatter. This will be their 1981. And since they, in my world, in my scenario, they had so much fun, putting together the documentary and recording Free as a Bird, Wonderful Christmas Time, they say, hey, well, let's make a new album, make a very last new material Beatle album, and they will record this in early 82, the year I was born, and it will come out in late 82. Maybe it will come out on November 21st, 1982, because this is the day I was born. And this album will be called Milk and Honey, and the tracklist will be, track 1 is the song Tug of War, track 2 is the track All Those Years Ago, George Harrison, track 3 I Don't Wanna Face It, track 4 Wanderlust, track 5 Wake My Brain, so Ringo's song written by George, track 6 The Pound Is Sinking. Side B would start off with I'm Stepping Out. Then track 2 on side B, Take It Away. Track 3, Nobody Told Me. And Nobody Told Me, it's going to be sung either by Ringo or John. You have to notice that Ringo already had one song on that album, Wake My Brain, Wreck My Brain. But so, maybe a duet. Maybe it's a duet between John and Ringo, that John sings one verse and Ringo the other, or one sings the chorus, the other the verses. Initially John supposedly had written Nobody Told Me for Ringo to sing, but then he was murdered, and it was put out on his posthumous Milk and Honey John Lennon album. But in this scenario, you know, Ringo could sing it, or as I said, they could make a duet out of it, which would be something new. On the last Beatle album, they still would do something they hadn't done before, a duet between John and Ringo. Track 4 is Ballroom Dancing, and the album would finish with track 5, which is track 11, all in all, Grow Old With Me, which would be a, you know, would be a touching very last song on a very last Beatle album. But they wouldn't, immediately after that, they wouldn't split up. They would make a final world tour. The last tour was in 1966, and the last concert they did together was the concert for Bangladesh, in my timeline at least, and they did this, just watched the 1971 video. But they will do a, you know, full-blown great 100 concerts around the world, final world tour, and in late '83 the really very last Beatle album, if you can, not a studio album, but you know, an album, would be a live album, the Beatles Around the World or something like that, you know, the world tour, the best bits from the world tour. Could be a double, maybe even a triple album. Yeah, and then they would, as friends, split up for good, you know. I think it's still also in my scenario, I think it's better to, you know, they should still be young, they should all be not much older than 40 when they split up, so that the youthful, you know, what the Beatles stood for could be preserved, and that's, you know, nothing against the Rolling Stones, but Stones will always look a bit cheaper than the Beatles, because, you know, they're 80 years of age and still touring, and still, you know, being active as a group. But I think to keep the Beatles in the best possible memory, it would be wise to, with a cracking live double or triple album and a very good last album, Milk and Honey, to call it a day. And after that, each of the 4 Beatles, you know, John Lennon is still alive, would, you know, make solo albums. Possibly Paul would do the most solo albums, you know, like his real career, like every 2 or 3 years a new album. Maybe John will also have 3 or 4, 5 or 6 solo albums, you know, like every 5 or 6 years a new album. George as well, Ringo as well, a couple of solo albums. So yeah, so there would still be new music by them, but not as the Beatles. But I think that would be, I think the way the career for the Beatles worked in the real world, you know, it can't be better than that. That's like the ultimate Hollywood way of imagining a perfect career. Maybe it's even too perfect almost. But you know, this is just an alternate take, and I would say not as good as it was in the real world, but very good. And you know, the good thing about my scenario, you know, you can say whatever you want, but the good thing would be that John Lennon would still be with us, and George Harrison, possibly in this scenario as well. So that was this mini-series, Beatles Fantasy Albums. Thank you very much for watching.